Our drop-down can open and close, but we can't seem to actually select any items. So here's the behavior that we really want. When a user selects an item, so they actually click on something like coconut cream pie, we want three things to happen. The drop-down should close, the button text should update with the new selection text, and finally, when we reopen the drop-down, our current selection should be highlighted. We're going to solve each of these three items by listening for click events and updating our state property. So the first thing we need to do is listen to a click on an individual item. We're going to do this by passing another click handler to each individual list item when they're created inside of our dropdown. So to do that, we're going to bind this function, and then we're going to add a click handler in here, and we're going to call it when item clicked. Now remember, since list item is a React component, we are passing in our callback or our click handler as a named property, and it's going to be named when item clicked. So we'll give a reference to a new function, handle item click, that we're going to define inside of our dropdown. So we'll write handle item click. Cool. Now inside of our list item, we have access to this click handler inside of here, and it's going to come in on the props object as when item clicked. So we want to actually implement our callback as a callback handler on this anchor tag right here. So we want that to happen when the anchor tag is clicked. So we'll say on click equals this dot handle click. And when we run handle click, we'll run this function, which will then invoke this dot props when item clicked. Okay, so notice the pattern that I used in here. Instead of just calling this dot props dot when item clicked directly, I chose to break it out as a separate callback function in here. And that's something that's totally optional. It's something that you'll really only want to do if you want to have multiple behaviors go on when your element gets a click event. So if I wanted to call this callback and I also wanted to say console log I was clicked, I would take this type of approach where I call a callback function inside of list item, where I can not only call the callback that was handed down to me from my parent, but I could also execute some other code that I choose. In this case, we don't really need a console log here, so we'll take that out. Now, here's the really interesting thing. We know that when we build our list item, we're going to pass this handle item click function in, and then list item says, okay, when I get clicked, I'm going to run handle click, which calls the callback that is given to me from the dropdown. So you can kind of imagine that if I clicked on this anchor tag right here, we're going to run this function, and so we'll be sitting inside of here. So the immediate question becomes, how in the world do I know what just got clicked, right? I don't have any argument in here per se that says, hey, here's the argument, or here's the list item that just got clicked. So I actually need to know which item got clicked. And that's why we take this kind of pattern right here, where we have a second callback function that kind of acts as an intermediary or a proxy to calling the function that we really care about, which is when item clicked. Because what we can do is call the callback with this dot props dot item. So now when item clicked is called, we will know which item was called. So handle item click will get called with the item title. So let's make sure that this works. We'll console log item, and then we'll make sure gulp is running. Refresh the page, and now I'm going to click on item, and it looks like we got our callback is working properly, but we got undefined instead of our actual item that we care about. So let's double check on our callback function right here. I made a little mistake. It's not this.props.items, it's just item. So I'm going to save, refresh the page, and fantastic, there we go. So now when we are inside of dropdown, inside of handle item click, we know which line item is getting clicked here. Now let's do something with this item name. We need to make 3 steps, make sure that the 3 steps that we outlined at the start of the section are actually occurring, and that's we want to close the dropdown, we want to change the button text, and when the list is reopened, we want to make sure that the currently selected item is highlighted. So the first 2 steps in here, which is to close the dropdown and to make sure that the button title gets updated, we're going to do by manipulating our state object. So I'll say this dot set state, and the first thing I want to do is make sure that the dropdown closes. So remember, whenever I set state, it's going to change our state object, and then it's going to immediately call the render function. So if I want my dropdown to close, I'll say open, and I'll say false. And that means that the dropdown, we're going to forcibly close it right now. And then we're also going to introduce another property onto our state object called item title. And that will get this item property, which is the name of the item that got passed. So now, when someone clicks on a line item, we're going to first close the dropdown and then set this new property item title. And we want item title to be what shows up on our button. So you can kind of imagine this title right here now needs to get updated with our this.state.item title instead of this.props.title. So we now have a kind of interesting solution or situation here where the first time we render this component, we want to use title because title is going to have our initial state, kind of like our our default state where it says please select a dessert. And then when someone actually selects an item, we want to use this totally different property or this totally different reference, this different string, which is going to be this currently selected item. So what we can do here is just say this.state.item title or this.props.title. So what this will do is it'll say, okay, do I have a state property in here? If I do, let's use that. Otherwise, I'm going to use the property that's passed in from my parent instead. All right. Let's refresh our page and select an item. And sure enough, the dropdown closes and our text gets updated just like I would expect a dropdown to have occur. I'm going to open it back up, and unfortunately our item isn't selected here, so we still got one last little thing to do. So we want this item, this list item right here, to be highlighted when it is the selected item. What we'll do is on creating list item, we'll pass in a class name to the list item that's going to say, if you are the currently selected item, then you should be highlighted. So we'll say class name, and let's do a little bit of reformatting here. So we'll say class name should be this.state.item title. And when our currently selected item title is equal to this item, then I want the class name active. Otherwise, I want just an empty string. So now when this list item that we're creating is getting past the item that is equal to the currently selected item, we're going to give it the class name active. Now remember again that since this is a React component, class name is being passed in as a property, not as an actual class that's going to show up on top of list item. So now we need to go into list item and make sure that we're actually making use of this class name property. Unfortunately, that's going to be pretty straightforward. So first off, we're going to do just a little bit of refactoring here. And then we'll make use of this new class name. Excuse me, that's the incorrect property. It's item title, class name, sorry. This.props.class name. So then we'll refresh. We'll select a dessert. And sure enough, when we open the dropdown back open, our selected item is actually highlighted. So we'll try selecting apple pie, and apple pie is selected. Peach cobbler and peach cobbler is selected. Fantastic. So in this section, we use state to accomplish three things. First, when the user selects a dropdown or selects an item inside the dropdown will actually close. When they select something, the dropdown title will update. And finally, when the user opens the dropdown back open, the currently selected item will be highlighted. Awesome. I'll catch you in the next section.